Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline Live. Our guest this evening is Dr. Harsha de Silva, economist, Member of Parliament, and of course representing the SJB. Dr. Harsha de Silva has got some concerns. One of his primary concerns at the moment is for and on behalf of the people, especially when it comes to the EPF funds. He's here. He'll tell us all about his concerns. Good evening, Dr. Harsha. Welcome.
Good evening, Faraz.
What's your concern about the EPF?
Well, I mean, the EPF, when it was established in 1958, the worker and the employer both contribute, and 12 and 3%. And the objective was for this fund to grow, for it to give returns to the members, so that once the member retires, she can enjoy the rest of his or her life with what they would get from this
lifetime's work, basically.
Yes, provident fund. Interestingly, in the act itself, they specified a 2.5% return.
Okay.
Usually it doesn't happen in the act, it comes in regulation.
Right.
But strangely so, it happened in this case.
Right. Is that like a minimum return?
Precisely, right? But at the time, inflation was, around 1%. If you look back, the 5 years prior to 1958, average would have been around 1%. Treasury bill rates also were in the same region. So the 2.5% was actually much higher than what you would get for your treasury bills, and certainly a positive real return, meaning that you would receive after inflation something in return for your investment.
Right.
Now, over the years, some years have been positive, some years have been negative in terms of real returns. Now, last year, the EPF return on a real basis was minus 47%.
Wow.
Right?
That's after taking into account the inflation.
That is true, because you got 9% nominal return, but inflation was 50-odd%, so the real return was 47%. So therefore, already the members of the Provident Fund have been fairly, burdened, and their pension, the value of their Provident Fund had significantly eroded.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the pension, the Provident Fund itself, the value of it in dollar terms was something like $15.8 billion dollars in 21, and by end of 22, it had fallen to something like $9 billion. But with the appreciation,
is that because of the exchange rate?
Yeah. And with the exchange rate appreciating, it had gained about perhaps $1.7 billion in the last few months. But still, if you want to call it a haircut, in dollar terms, you've already taken about a 30% cut.
Right.
So the issue is now with the domestic debt optimization, how much of that burden would the members of the EPF have to take? How much will the banks have to take? And so on. So this is the real issue, right? And we must make sure that any domestic debt optimization takes into consideration the hit already received by the members of the EPF and whatever additional burden they would have to take.
Yeah.
So I want to clarify a couple of things. One is, why do you call it a domestic debt optimization as opposed to a forex debt restructuring?
Yes.
Now, in the case of a restructuring, in this case, for us, Now, we ask the ISP holders, the bilaterals to take some sort of haircut.
Right.
Some sort of debt treatment. It can be a haircut on the face value, it can be an extension of the tenor, it can be a reduction in a coupon, or all put together. And that the loss is taken by outsiders. Now, in order for them to do that, we tell them, look, we have IMF program, we will be disciplined, hereafter we will not be, wasting money, we are going to rationalize our expenditure, we are going to increase our income and so on. And they say, okay, fine, if you're going to behave this way, we will allow you to take so much of relief. Now, if you look at the domestic debt for us, who's given us these loans? Who is going to take the cut? Domestic, right?
Yeah.
So, we have about 9 trillion rupees worth of treasury bonds and about another 4 trillion worth of treasury bills. All of these have been invested by local players. So, if you look at the treasury bills, about 2/3 of those bills are actually held by the central bank. But if you look at the treasury bonds, about 45% of those are accounted for by banks, and 43% by EPF, and the rest by insurance company and others. So therefore, the government has said, look, the debt treatment is only going to be on the central bank's holdings in treasury bills.
Right.
Which means they will have to deal with it somehow. The way we see it is, instead of the treasury bills, they will be transformed into treasury bonds, and the tenor extended perhaps beyond 2032, and they will deal with it internally with the central bank. There can be an issue where central bank will have negative equity, but there have been countries that have gone through such periods. The only issue is the central bank will not be able to transfer profits to the treasury. Leave that aside. Now you look at the treasury bonds, what happens there is there has been a proposal made, as far as we understand, to the 3 state banks thus far. And the proposal is, look, we will give you a new series of bonds going beyond 2032, right, with a reduced coupon, right, no face value haircut, but once you work out the net present value of those bonds, there is going to be a relief that is coming to the government.
Right.
Right. So when that happens, the banks will see a reduction in their assets. There are 2 main assets. One group of assets are the bills, the treasury bonds, right? So if there is debt treatment on those bonds, the value of those bonds, the assets will decline. And the other major asset they have, obviously, are the loans they are given to various people. So with the economy contracting, the NPLs are increasing, and therefore, when the value of these assets fall and the liabilities remain the same, there is going to be a fall in shareholder equity. Therefore, you're going to have problems with what is called capital adequacy minimum ratios. And then the government will either have to bring in a new capital, or else somebody else will have to fill that gap.
Right.
We can talk about that later. But there is going to be some sort of cost that is going to be incurred by these banks. So the point is, with increasing debt treatment, whether it is a face value haircut or whatever else it is,
whichever combination,
the capital shortfall is going to increase, and there is something called the net debt relief, right? For us, what it means is, as the treatment, the amount of relief that is obtained by the government increases, these banks will at some point, the cost will exceed the benefit. So that is why there is something called, like I said earlier, the net debt relief, which increases to a point, and if you continue to increase the debt treatment on the banks, it will begin to come down. So that the debt relief that the government is going to obtain will increase and then fall. And that if you continue to increase the debt treatment, it might even become negative, right? So the issue is not only for the EPF, like I explained to you earlier, but also for the banks. There will be repercussions. So the concern is, how are we going to manage this? You see?
Yes. You're talking about in terms of this potential domestic debt restructuring that will come.
Like I said, let's call it a domestic debt optimization. Because there is going to be benefit to the government and a cost to the holders.
In terms of operationally, when the EPF is down, say 43%, how does that come to affect the beneficiaries? Is that because the government will still be paying them the old rate?
See, this is where we need to have a dialogue on this. In that the government is paying 9%. They paid 9% return on EPF's investments, right?
Yeah.
Why there is a negative 47% return is due to inflation.
Right.
Now, if inflation falls, right, and under the restructuring scenario, the optimization scenario, EPF is also offered, say, bonds at, say, they are perhaps saying 11%, or maybe 9 to 11%, and then the inflation falls to, say, 5%, right? Then you have a real return of 5 or 6%.
Yes.
So therefore, it is not all terrible. What I'm saying is that you have to be careful in structuring these instruments so that the hit the members have already taken is somehow compensated down the road. You see, so that's the point.
And is there no mechanism that the government can top up because this is not index linked, and therefore because taking into account the inflation and so on, isn't there a scheme that the government can
Interesting question, because on the FX side, what we understand is that the bondholders are saying not only that the domestic debt needs to be restructured, optimized, but if the GDP growth is going to be greater than what is projected, which is 3% by 2027, any additional growth must then be compensated to the bondholders.
Right.
So what they're saying is, we need to issue what's called a GDP-linked warrant. Okay. So it's like a derivative, right?
Yeah.
So if growth is more than 3%, then they have the right to ask for additional return. Right?
Because we've had better times.
We have better times, right? So the people are taking a massive hit, and we were just talking outside. Interest rates are really high. Businesses are faltering. Unemployment is going up. It's terrible issues with poverty increasing and all that. So therefore, the the citizens of this country are actually sort of giving up quite a bit in order to restructure the debt and to get the country back on track. So the benefits that accrue then cannot be completely given away to the foreign bondholders. You see, my point is that. So therefore, if there is going to be any GDP-linked warrants issued to the foreigners, in my assessment, these should be also be given to the guys who are taking the hit locally, whether it is the EPF or whether it is the state banks. Because given that this is technically voluntary, right? The what is called a consultation document has only been given to the state banks. Thus far, the private banks seem to be quite all right.
Okay. But actually, we can't really, the state banks, we can't afford for the state banks to do this because they're already holding around 7 trillion.
No, but then it is the state banks and the EPF that will have to carry the burden. Right? So I'll tell you what's going to happen in the way I see it is, you have a shortfall, right, in capital.
Yeah.
If the government is unable to recapitalize, then the multilaterals, ADB, World Bank, very likely would come in and fill the gap.
Yeah.
But they are not going to continue to do that forever.
Yeah.
So in the second step, if they want to take their money back, what could happen is a certain percentage of these state banks could be then issued to outside investors so that they can replenish this capital.
On that note, Dr. Harsha, let's go for a short break and take a peek at this evening's headlines from the Primetime News team. We'll see you on the other side of the break with Dr. Harsha de Silva.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
China's Sinopec enters Sri Lanka's retail fuel market with 200 filling stations. Operations to commence within 45 days. Petition filed by 39 SLPP politicos against 18 people, including General Shavindra, over May 9th violence, withdrawn. Hartley Champika launches new political party. Minister Tiran Alas says no change in ministries. Will the PUCSL chief, who stood by the people, be sent home via a parliament proposal? Protest in Anuradhapura demanding a solution to the human-elephant conflict. New office bearers of Sri Lanka cricket assume duties.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali on TV1.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Dr. Harsha de Silva from the SJB. Dr. Harsha, if your party was in power, what would you do with the EPF? How would you address these concerns that you legitimately have?
Yeah, so this is precisely what I'm saying. I don't think there is a way out, because there are two things we need two conditions, or rather we have to bring down the debt to GDP from wherever it is 120 to 95 by 2032, right? Then from 2032 onwards, we have to bring down the what is called the gross financing need. That means the cash flow that the government needs to pay for all its expenditure, from 34% of GDP last year to 13% of GDP. So that's a big reduction in that cash flow requirement, right? So in order to do that, we have to both restructure the FX debt and domestic debt. You cannot just do it by letting the foreigners take the entire burden. It's almost impossible to do it, right? So that is why there has to be some amount of domestic debt optimization that needs to take place. It is irrelevant who the government is. I'm not saying not to do that.
No.
All what I'm saying is we have to accept the fact that some amount of domestic restructuring needs to happen. And when you do that, that we make sure that the holders of the members of the EPF are adequately taken care of. That's the point I'm trying to make here. I'm not saying don't do it. You know, some people say, well, I mean, you can't do a domestic restructure, the banks will fail. I don't think so. Now, I'm not saying that just because you do this, all the banks are going to fail.
No.
Actually, you know, they will be given new series of bonds to compensate for the bonds that they now have. Now, but there is another issue though. For instance, now let's take the EPF, right? Now, EPF, if their bonds mature in a year's time or 2 years' time, then perhaps they can reinvest those bonds at say 15% or 18%, right? But given the new series, they will not be able to reinvest those bonds for anything more than say 9% or 10%. So therefore, there is going to be some amount of opportunity cost that the members will have to take. Right? But the EPF itself, I don't think is in trouble because every year a certain number of rupees comes into the EPF as contributions and certain number of rupees go out. So I looked at the past so many years, there is about a 30 billion rupee difference, positive. So there's cash flow positive, right? Because the contributions are more than the amounts that get taken away. So therefore, there is no real risk in EPF not being able to meet its obligations. It's just that the return on the investments for a certain period of time will fall, will decrease. Now, given the EPF members have taken such a big hit, the government has to be, mindful of the fact that they mustn't overburden the EPF. That's the point I'm trying to make.
And Dr. Harsha, what about this business where there have been claims that in the Mahinda Rajapaksa years, 2005 till the end of 14, that the EPF funds were used to, some of it was used to purchase investments in the stock market at vastly sort of, at the top end of the market.
I mean, it is now, exposed.
Yeah.
It's in the report, one entire report in the Bond Commission report.
Yeah.
Was also about how EPF was used in the stock market.
Right.
And I don't want to get into it now, but there is enough evidence to show that it was misused.
But my point here, and the reason for mentioning this, is not to rake up all that, but to point out that in light of this 43% adupadu, if you like, from the EPF side, on top of that, we've also had these sort of not so good investments made, even though they may not be, they may not have cashed up.
Yeah, so this is the thing for us, because if we are talking about, let's say 2.5% or 4%, whichever, right, positive real return, right, on the investments of the EPF.
Yeah.
In fact, the Act says that if the EPF is unable to meet that minimum payment, then there must be a parliamentary resolution to provide the EPF with sufficient funds to make that payment to the members. Now, think about the logic there, right? And then, over a period of time, that loan can be settled. So, the focus of the EPF was and continues to be and should be that it is the retirement benefits of the worker, of the employee. It cannot be subjugated by the fact that the government requires cheap money, and therefore, to help with the members of the EPF, we will take the money and give the members a minus 47% real return. So that's a serious matter, right? Because when you say minus 47% real return, meaning, if I had 100 rupees worth of buying power, right?
You have 47.
I only have 53 rupees of buying power because of what happened to my fund in the last year. So therefore, there is a problem, the conflict of interest in the central bank, which has happened for the last 50 plus years.
Yeah.
And that is the public debt department and the employees provident fund department are two separate departments within the central bank. They are both doing agency functions. In fact, none of these two should be inside the central bank.
They should be independent.
Independent. The public debt office should sit independently, and they should find the best way, the lowest cost method to fund the government's requirement. But what has happened, and that is where all these allegations have been sort of over the years been coming up, is that the government's requirement to borrow supersedes the need for the EPF to get the best return for the employees. Now, just go back during Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa's 2019 to before we got, before we declared bankruptcy. They had a 5% maximum rate at which the Treasury borrowed, right? Now, which means that the members were not able to get market rate, or market rate in reality would have been far higher if the arbitrary maximum of 5% was not put in there, right? So that happens because the central bank is always controlled, or has been and continues to be until the new act comes into force, controlled by the political elements within the Treasury and the government.
Is there anything that the SJB is now doing, trying to influence the outcome of this matter with the EPF funds?
Yes, in fact, just today we had a discussion with Professor G.L. Pires also and others. The entire opposition is together looking at this issue. And, there have been some suggestions, perhaps one needs to move court on this matter. But, we need to sit and discuss that, it is not, possible for a person to say, look, we can do without a domestic restructure. If that is the case, then we'll have to prove, look, we have to be able to push the entire burden on the foreigners, right? And that is difficult given the massive reduction in what I just told you earlier, the gross financing need that we have to meet. So there has to be some sort of burden sharing. And in this burden sharing exercise, there has to be some equitable equation here, so that the domestic debt holders are not unfairly treated.
Right. Well, Dr. Harsha de Silva, thank you for bringing these concerns out here into the open. I'm sure the public do appreciate your time. And more than that, also, I suppose we all hope, especially the stakeholders in the EPF, that you and your party and everybody else will actually see the sense of what you're saying and resolve the matter somewhat equitably.
Yeah, I mean, we want to, and I'm really committed to pushing through an amendment to the EPF Act so that the minimum return is defined as a real return hereafter.
Thank you. And that's the way it was on Newsline Live this evening. Tomorrow, there's a Newsline special at 8 p.m. instead of 8:30, 8 p.m. And that is when we have Team IMF giving us an exclusive interview right here on Newsline. Take care, have a great evening, and don't forget, tomorrow, 8 p.m. instead of 8:30. Take care. God bless you.